Okay. Hey, what's up? I'm going to be reviewing this new horror movie, Bring Her Back. This is the second film from former YouTubers Ryan and Danny Phillipou. The first being 2023's Talk to Me, which I think is one of the best horror movies of the past few years. Incredibly scary, also just a lot of fun in a sense, but is also quite serious and using its scares to say something very interesting about grief. A theme that shows up once again within Bring Her Back. It also had a really great Sophie Wilde performance, a great lead performance, and once again we get a great female lead performance in Bring Her Back in the form of Sally Hawkins, who is very much playing against type here. Her most memorable roles and stuff like Paddington or Shape of Water, she's very much known for being uncomplicatedly likable and charming. And here, kind of similar to something that Hugh Grant did in Heretic. I think they're both kind of the actor and actress forms of a comfy sweater. They are using their archetype and their persona that they've cultivated for their entire career and twisting it in a way that subverts your expectations of them as actors. Sally Hawkins here is playing someone who is meant to be incredibly accommodating and welcoming, or at least appear to be that, but under the surface is quite nefarious and just frankly very evil. But she's talented enough as a performer to bring a lot of sympathy and pathos to this character. It's a very nuanced role where you're supposed to be actively rooting against her for the majority of the film, but also feel sorry for her for most of it. And Hawkins toes that line incredibly well. Another performance to note here is Billy Barat, who is one of the younger performers in this film. He plays Andy, basically a co-lead with Sally Hawkins in a sense. And I found a lot of their scenes together where they had this dynamic of trying to figure each other out to be really, really entertaining. Both Hawkins and Barrett's characters are dealing with the loss of a loved one in very different ways. But one aspect I find very interesting about Andy as a character is the person that he's lost within his life is someone that he doesn't necessarily like very much, and he's almost glad is gone. And it's very compelling to see him come to terms with that idea while also still feeling grieved for the loss of someone that he has been abused by for the majority of his life. There's a particularly great phone call voicemail monologue that he has near the latter half of this film that I thought was just really, really incredible acting, very powerful stuff. On the completely other end of the spectrum, there's another child performance, actually two child performances, but the one I want to mention and highlight here is Jonah Phillips, who plays Oliver. A really great possessed kid performance, which is something that oddly happens often in horror movies. I think just because it's really scary to watch children not behave like children. But he is immediately haunting and very unsettling the moment that he appears on screen and has a couple of really, really terrifying moments. This film generally is a little bit less fun than Talk to Me and is instead going for this very disturbing, psychologically unnerving tone that I think works really well with its themes, talking about how different people cope with grief and almost how they lose themselves within that grief and slowly descend into madness, which is certainly what is happening with a couple of the characters in this film. It's also quite a slow burn. It doesn't really get to any of the grotesque gore or violence until about 30 minutes into the film. The first act is entirely just setting up character and setting up the themes of the film, and they do so quite effectively. It's a very tight movie that deals out exposition in an entertaining and efficient way, while also showing the audience what makes these characters tick and their specific flaws and attributes. So there is that slow burn and psychological feel to the film, but it also has a couple of body horror elements that are really, really creepy. The Phillipou Brothers are known, even from their YouTube days, for having really, really great special effects, and that is definitely the case here. The makeup and the gore is so realistic that it's quite hard to look at times, and the specific creative ideas for like scenes of when they incorporate the gore into the film are really, really creepy. And as a result, the scares get a little bit further than Talk to Me. There's also some aspects of like snuff film or found footage in a sense in these like VCRs or cassettes that Sally Hawkins' character has found. It reminds me a little bit of the stuff from that Ethan Hawke movie Sinister, although the tapes have a very different role in the plot in this film, but have that sense of realism and like found footageness to them that it feels as if it's so intense and so real that maybe the audience shouldn't even be looking at it. A lot of the horror in the film is constantly pushing the audience away and forcing them to look away or be disgusted by what they're looking at. But at the same time, the empathetic performances really draw you in a way that makes you more susceptible to looking into the disturbing aspects of this film, which is really where it starts to get into its themes. There's lots of symbolism here about like water and blindness and a bunch of other stuff that I don't think I'm necessarily smart enough to fully grasp the extent of what they're getting at here. Once again, it's very similar to Talk to Me, although it's going about exploring grief in a little bit of a different way. In comparison to Talk to Me, this movie is just a little bit slower and lacks that instantly iconic imagery of the hand that made Talk to Me so special and like such an instant success. But I do think the filmmaking is on par with Talk to Me here. There is a minor criticism I have about the Phillipou Brothers filmmaking here, and that is the score and the music supervision on it. You really get like melancholic strings and ominous chords, and those are really the only two modes that this score has. It's, I guess, not one note, but it's two note, and it's effective, I guess, but it's not particularly creative or unique. On top of that, you have the soundtrack of this film, the music supervision aspect of it, which is quite puzzling. They're certainly going for like a juxtaposition between kind of happier, more energetic sounding songs with the more somber and disturbing tone of the film. And I understand that that's intentional and there's a reason they're doing it, but I don't necessarily think it adds much to the film. And in some instances, it feels like they're just using like YouTube stock music level songs. There's a couple needle drops that work, but I would say like 50 to 60% of them are quite weak and are honestly kind of baffling to watch. So really incorporating music into their films is the only clear flaw I see in their filmmaking. Other than that, I think they're well on their way to being like true masters of the horror genre. I think it's only a matter of time before the Phillipou Brothers go full body horror at some point, which would be really, really great, but also kind of terrifying. But I think Talk to Me and Bring Her Back show that the Phillipou Brothers are very talented within the horror genre and know how to explore dense themes while also making horror movies that are just really fun to watch, even if they are a little bit distancing because they're just so disturbing. Bring Her Back is certainly the scariest movie of the year so far, the best horror movie of the year so far, and is simultaneously very entertaining, but also you come out of it a little bit shell-shocked in a sense, which to me is like the exact feeling you want coming out of a horror movie. And as a result, I think this is really, really good. I would give Bring Her Back a 4 out of 5 for now. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. If you like horror, you should go watch this because it is really, really good stuff. Next week, I'm going to be reviewing Phoenician Scheme, so look out for that. Very, very excited for that movie. A very different movie from Bring Her Back, but nevertheless, can't wait for it. One of my most anticipated movies of the year. And yeah, that's about it for now. So maybe go watch Bring Her Back. And that's all I got. Goodbye.